Hello everybody and welcome back to another EDH gameplay video brought to you by Affinity for Commander. My name is Martin and today we have a game involving the avatar of Dragonkind, a founder of a wizarding college, a half-elven planeswalker and a master of Ethereum. But before we begin, I'd like to personally thank all of our absolutely amazing patrons listed on screen for their heartwarming generosity. We wouldn't be able to continue making videos such as these without your support, so thank you. Also, if you decide to make a purchase from any of these websites, then be sure to do so via our affiliate links in the video description. It won't cost you anything extra, but it really helps out the channel. And if you haven't already, then go check out altersleeves.com, where you can find thousands of super cool designs on perfect fit sleeves to really bling out your decks. Just be sure to quote us as the ones who sent you. But that's enough of that, let's take a look at those opening hands.
I am playing my Beledros Witherbloom Life Gain and Life Drain deck, which is also the closest thing to a past tribal deck that you're likely to find. I keep an opening hand containing Valentine, Dean of the Vein, Skull Clamp, Growing Rites of Itlimoc, Kodama's Reach, Twilight Mire, a Swamp, and a Forest.
I am playing my Breya Ethereum Shaper Artifacts Matter deck, which, as you may have guessed, runs a ton of artifact support and artifact focused cards. My opening hand consists of Tempered Steel, Thirst for Knowledge, Crumbling Necropolis, Exotic Orchard, Sulphurous Springs, Seat of the Synod, and an island.
Danny is playing his Freyalise Lanoir's Fury Elf tribal deck, which, shockingly enough, runs a lot of elves. His deck also contains a decent amount of token generators, as well as a lot of pump spells to help make his army of weenies a bit more intimidating. Danny keeps a starting hand made up of Emerald Medallion, Priest of Titania, Azuri Renegade Leader, Nissa Vastwood Seer, Timberwatch Elf, Parallel Lives, and a Forest.
And finally, Connor is playing his The Dragon tribal deck. This deck is filled with ramp spells allowing Connor to cast his high mana value creatures as soon as possible, and also contains some sneaky ways to cheat out his scaly boys into play. His opening hand contains Lightning Greaves, Elemental Bond, Hellkite Courser, Primeval's Glorious Rebirth, Command Tower, Savoy Triome, and Spire Garden.
I win the die roll and start things off by playing Swamp. Not yet finished, I cast Valentine, Dean of the Vein, and pass to Martin.
I play Crumbling Necropolis, and pass.
Danny plays a Forest and ends his turn with no turn 1 elf in an elf deck?
Connor plays Savoy Triome, and passes to Alex.
I play a Forest and then move to combat. Here I attack Martin with my Vampiric Dean, dealing him 1 damage and gaining a life due to the creature's lifelink. In my post-combat main phase, I tap a land to cast Skull Clamp, and with nothing more to do, I pass the turn.
I play Command Tower and unable to cast anything in my turn.
Danny plays a second Forest and casts Priest of Titania. Out of mana, he passes to Connor.
Connor plays Spire Garden and casts a rather fancy Sylvan Library before passing the turn.
I play Twilight Mire, move to combat and attack Connor with Valentine. He takes 1 damage, I gain 1 life, and I proceed to my second main phase. Here I tap out to cast Kodama's Reach, searching my library for 2 swamps. I put one of these into play tapped, the other into my hand, and end my turn.
I play Exotic Orchard and then cast Thirst for Knowledge.
You know it's an instant, right?
Anyway, I draw 3 cards, discard Filigree Angel, discard down to 7, and pass to Danny.
Danny taps both of his Forests and his Priest to cast Nissa Vastwood Seer, and uses her ETB to put a Forest from his library into his hand. He then plays the Forest as his land for turn, and passes.
Connor draws 2 additional cards in his draw step thanks to Sylvan Library, but decides not to keep any of them, putting them both back on top of his deck. Next he plays Blood Crypt, having the Shockland enter tapped, and casts Lightning Greaves before ending his turn.
I play a Forest, which I then use to help cast Talisman of Resilience. Not yet finished, I cast Growing Rites of Itlimoc and look at the top 4 cards of my library. I reveal Sangromancer from among these cards, put the Vampire into my hand and the rest on the bottom of my library before moving to combat. Here I attack Danny with my Warlock, which he is unable to block given the creature has Menace.
So many abilities for a 1-mana card.
I know, right? Danny takes 1, I gain 1, and with nothing else to do, I pass to Martin.
I play Seat of the Synod and tap all my lands to cast my commander, Breya Ethereum Shaper. I create 2 1/1 Thopter tokens with flying thanks to the Artificer's Enter the Battlefield effect, and then pass the turn.
Danny starts his turn by casting Emerald Medallion and then casts Azuri Renegade Leader. Moving to combat, he attacks me with Nissa, dealing me 2 damage, and then ends his turn.
Connor draws 3, puts 2 back, and plays Command Tower. He then casts Dragon's Horde and passes to Alex.
I play a forest and tap out to cast my commander, Beledros Witherbloom. I then move to combat where I once again attack Danny with Valentine, dealing him 1 damage and gaining me 1 life. Pleased that I've managed to get my commander out a few turns early, I pass the turn.
In my upkeep, Alex creates a 1/1 pest with Beledros' ability, and I cast one of my favourite planeswalkers, Doretti Ingenious Iconoclast. I activate his -1 ability, sacrificing a Thopter in order to destroy Alex's commander,
Rude.
and then end my turn.
Danny begins his turn by casting Elvish Archdruid and then taps out to cast Woodland Bellower. He searches the library for Elvish Warmaster, puts the Elven Warrior onto the battlefield, and passes to Connor.
Connor draws 2 additional cards with Sylvan Library, puts them back on top of his deck, and casts Goldspan Dragon. He puts a gold counter on Dragon's Horde, equips Lightning Greaves to his creature, and moves to combat. Here Connor considers attacking Doretti, and I persuade him not to by promising to use Doretti's -1 ability to destroy Danny's mana producing elves.
A fair deal considering Danny's lack of land.
He instead decides to send his gold obsessed dragon in Danny's direction, dealing him 4 damage and creating himself a rather fancy looking treasure token. Connor then moves to his second main phase where he immediately sacrifices the treasure token to generate 2 mana and taps his Dragon's Horde to cast Elemental Bond. Out of mana, Connor then passes the turn.
In my turn, I equip my Skull Comp to my Pest, immediately killing it. I gain a life, draw 2 cards, and play a Swamp as my land for turn. Next, I cast the Sangromancer that I put into my hand with my Growing Lights of Itlimoc, followed by Blight Mound. Happy with my plays, I end my turn.
I begin my turn by playing an island, and then cast Reverse Engineer. I draw 3 cards, and as promised activate Doretti's -1 ability, sacrificing my remaining Thopter. I destroy Danny's Elvish Archdruid this way, and the elf is exiled as a result of Valentine's ability. This prevents Sangromancer's ability from triggering as the elf never touched the graveyard, and I move to my end step. I discard down to 7, and Alex gains 6 life thanks to Sangromancer's other ability. With nothing more to do, I pass to Danny.
Danny starts his turn by using all of his mana to cast Akroma's Memorial, and then moves to combat. Here he attacks Martin with all of his flying, vigilant creatures, and unable to block, Martin takes 12 damage. Safe behind his wall of untapped creatures, Danny passes the turn.
Connor draws 3, and as usual, puts 2 of these cards back on top of his library.
Will he ever draw more than 1 card with that enchantment? Stay tuned to find out.
Next he casts Crux of Fate, destroying all non-dragons, and all creatures not owned by Alex that leave the battlefield this way are exiled by the Dean. Alex then creates 2 pests with his Blight Mound's trigger, and Connor moves to combat. He once again declares his intentions to attack Doretti, and I tell him that if Doretti survives I will use his -1 ability to destroy Danny's pesky memorial. Connor accepts this deal, instead attacking Alex, who takes 4 damage from the dragon. Connor then creates a treasure thanks to his dragon's ability, and ends his turn.
I play a forest and then move to combat. Remembering Martin's deal with Connor, I attack Danny with both of my pests, who get +1/+0 from my Mound's trigger. I deal him 4 damage and then proceed to my post-combat main phase. Here I tap out to recast my commander, and with nothing else to do, pass to Martin.
Alex makes a pest in my upkeep and I play Temple of the False God. Next I recast my commander, creating 2 Thopters with her ETB, and then activate Duretti's -1 ability, reducing his loyalty to 0. I sacrifice a Thopter, destroying a Chroma's Memorial in the process, and pass the turn.
I make a pest in Danny's upkeep, and Danny casts Champion of Lampholt.
That's a funny looking elf there, Danny, just saying.
Seriously struggling for mana without his mana dorks, Danny ends his turn.
Alex makes another pest in Connor's upkeep and Connor draws 3 cards. He puts 2 of these back on top of his deck, sacrifices his treasure to float 2 mana, and casts Ramos Dragon Engine. He puts another gold counter on his Horde, draws a card of Elemental Bond, and equips his shoes to the Robotic Dragon. Moving to combat, Connor attacks Danny with Goldspan Dragon, dealing him 4 damage and creating himself a treasure. He then proceeds to his post-combat main phase where he sacrifices the treasure to float 2 mana, which he uses to help cast Cultivate. Connor puts a +1/+1 counter on his Dragon Engine, puts a Plains into play tapped and an island into his hand before passing to Alex.
I create yet another pest in my upkeep and equip my Skull Clamp to it, killing it instantly.
Bit mean to the poor thing, really.
I gain a life, draw 2 cards, and then play a forest, which I then use to equip my fashionable headwear to another of my pests. The critter dies, gaining me a life. I draw 2 cards, and then cast Blossoming Bog Beast. Moving to combat, I attack Martin with all 4 of my now 2/1 pests who have menace, and he declares no blocks. Martin takes 8 damage and I move to my end step, when Martin responds by land cycling Ash Barrens. He puts a Plains into his hand from his library, and my Growing Rites of Itlamok transforms into Itlamok, Cradle of the Sun. Pleased with my position in the game, I pass the turn.
Alex makes a pest in my upkeep and I play Great Furnace as my land for turn. Next I cast Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, and refrain from activating any of his abilities for the time being. Not yet finished, I cast Thoughtcast, paying 1 mana to draw 2 cards.
Now that is some value.
I then use my remaining mana and Tezzeret's passive ability to cast Master of Ethereum for a single blue mana, and activate my Planeswalker's +2 ability. He deals 5 damage to Danny, Connor and Alex, and I gain 5 life, which I have to admit is super strong for a positive costing loyalty ability.
It really is.
Holding back creatures to block any attacks against my walker, I end my turn.
I make a pest in Danny's upkeep, and Danny sighs deeply as he once again fails to draw a land.
Such a terrible shame.
However, if there's one thing that elf decks can do, it's put boots on the board with very little mana. Danny proves this by casting Timberwatch Elf, closely followed by Elvish Mystic. He puts 2 +1/+1 counters on Champion of Lampholt, and then passes to Connor.
Alex makes a pest in Connor's upkeep and Connor draws 2 additional cards of his Sylvan library. In a shocking turn of events, he pays 8 life to keep both of these cards in his hand, plays an island, and casts the Prismatic Bridge. He puts 5 +1/+1 counters on Ramos, which he swiftly removes to produce double Wooburg, and uses 4 of this to cast the Great Henge, putting a +1/+1 counter on his Robotic Dragon. Not yet finished, Connor casts Hellkite Courser, putting another +1/+1 counter on Ramos, and cheating the Dragon into play.
Now that is a ridiculous card if I've ever seen one.
Both dragons enter with a +1/+1 counter thanks to the Great Henge, and Connor draws 4 cards from the combined effects of his Henge and Elemental Bond. He then puts 2 gold counters on Dragon's Horde, moves his Greaves over to the Courser, and moves to combat. Here Connor attacks me with all 4 of his dragons, triggering Goldspan Dragon and his commander's abilities. He makes a treasure, draws 4 cards, and puts Drakuseth Maw of Flames onto the battlefield for the low cost of 0 mana. This puts another gold counter on his Horde, draws him 2 cards, and puts a +1/+1 counter on the newly cast dragon.
My word, he really is going off there, isn't he?
Not wishing to put myself in 1-hit KO range of the Dragon, I block Connor's commander with my Thopter, taking 18 damage from unblocked dragons. Still not finished, Connor moves to his second main phase, where he taps the Henge to float 2 mana, gaining 2 life. He uses this mana to help cast Commander Sphere and moves to his end step, where Alex responds by casting Reckless Spite. He destroys Ramos and Goldspan Dragon in this way, losing 5 life to the spell, and Connor proceeds to his end step. He puts his commander back into the command zone, discards a lot of cards, and passes the turn.
That was without a doubt one of the most explosive turns I've ever seen in a game of EDH.
You can say that again.
That was without a doubt one of the most explosive turns I've ever seen in a game of EDH.
Why am I with you?
I don't know. I make a pest in my upkeep, play a forest, and equip Skull Clamp to the pest that I just created. I gain a life, draw 2 cards, and then cast Pristine Talisman. Still not finished, I cast Rampant Growth, putting a swamp into play tap this way, and tap my talisman, gaining another life. I use the mana that my talisman produced to equip my Skull Clamp to another pest, killing it, gaining me another life, and drawing me 2 more cards.
If nothing else, these pests are amazing Skull Clamp fodder.
Indeed they are. Moving to combat, I attack Connor with all 6 of my remaining Pest, Blossoming Bog Beast, and Beledros Witherbloom. Connor desperately tries to persuade me not to kill him as we are, quote, the Dragon Alliance. But his pleas fall on deaf ears as I proceed with my attacks. Blossoming Bog Beast ability triggers, gaining me 2 life, and giving all my creatures +5/+5 and trample until the end of turn. In addition to this, my pests also get a +1/+0 buff and menace from Blight Mound, resulting in Connor taking lethal damage no matter how he blocks. He decides not to declare any blockers, accepting his fate head on, and I move to my second main phase. Here I cast Dina Soul Steeper, followed by Veto Thorn of the Dusk Rose. With my victory all but assured, I end my turn.
Alex makes a pest in my upkeep, and I pay a blue and red mana to cast Ethereum Horn Sorcerer, triggering their Cascade ability. I put Kuldotha Forge Master into play this way, play a Plains, and then cast Tempered Steel, which in my opinion is one of the best Anthem effects ever printed.
A bold claim indeed.
Still not finished, I cast Emry, Lurker of the Lock for 1 mana, and put the top 4 cards of my library into my graveyard. I then activate Tezzeret's +2 ability, dealing 6 damage to both of my opponents and gaining 6 life. Keeping all of my creatures back as blockers, I pass to Danny.
I make a pest in Danny's upkeep, and Danny taps out to cast his commander, Freyalise Llanowar's Fury. He activates her -2 ability, destroying my Skull Clamp and preventing me from drawing a silly amount of cards next turn. Moving to combat, Danny attacks me with his Champion of Lampolt, and taps his Timberwatch Elf to give the champion +2/+2. Unable to block it, I take 5 damage, and with nothing left to do, Danny passes the turn.
Alex makes, you guessed it, a pest in his upkeep, and then plays Hissing Quagmire. Next he sacrifices the pest that he just created to Dina's ability, giving her +1/+0 and gaining himself a life. Veto and Dina then trigger, having Danny lose 1 life and I lose 2, and Alex then casts Sanguine Bond. Why didn't you cast that before you sacrificed the pest?
Because reasons, that's why.
Anyway, next Alex activates Veto's ability, giving all of his creatures lifelink until the end of turn. He then moves to combat, and I respond by activating one of Breya's abilities. I sacrifice both of my artifact lands to give the Bog Beast -4/-4, and in response Alex taps Pristine Talisman, gaining another life. This causes myself and Danny to both lose 2 life, and Alex uses the mana that he just produced to sacrifice the beast to Dina's ability. The Dryad gets +3/+0, and Alex attacks Danny with all of his creatures. This deals him lethal damage, and Alex drains me for lethal thanks to the combined effects of Veto, Sanguine Bond and Dina, given that all of his creatures that hit Danny had lifelink. Well, that's it for another game. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did. Don't forget that you can help to support the channel in 4 quick and easy ways: liking this video, subscribing, hitting the bell icon, and leaving us a comment. I read every one. Also, if you really like us, then consider checking out our Patreon page, where you can find rewards such as custom tokens and playmats for as little as $1 a month. That's all for now though, we'll see you next time. Stay awesome!